So in this tutorial video, we're going to look at how to create a nice hard sync lead, and it sounds like this. So nice big sound, lots going on. You'll recognize it from such tunes as Robot Rock by Daft Punk, and it's a type of sound that shows up a lot, and once you know how to program the basics of it, it becomes a very good starting point for lots of other really cool sound design. So here's the patch by itself. Very big tone and lots of cool stuff going on in it. So let's get stuck in. So the real backbone of the sound is a hard oscillator sync synth. So we're going to use Massive for this, again, just because Massive is a very ubiquitous synth and a lot of people either have it or are familiar with it and can thus translate what I'm doing in Massive to what's applicable for their synth of choice. But really, the thing that you need to know is that in order to pull off a patch like this, you have to be able to control the tuning of the slave oscillator in a sync situation via an envelope. And really, you need a couple envelopes at your disposal. You need one for the amp section, and you also need one, at the very least one, for your oscillator tuning. Now, again, like I explained in our section on oscillator sync sometimes shows up in a couple different ways in synthesizers. It can show up as a setting that you can toggle on and off in between a couple oscillators in the oscillator section. So it may be a little switch that says sync in between oscillators 1 and 2 or something of the like. And if that's the case, then in order to get this effect, you're going to just be directly controlling the pitch of the slave oscillator of one of the two oscillators in that oscillator section of your synth. Or it may show up like it does in Massive. I'm just dialing up pulse saw sync virtual analog oscillator here. It may show up as a sync knob. And in the case of a sync knob, as I mentioned earlier on, basically that means that what we're dealing with is essentially two oscillators contained within oscillator 1 here. There's a master and a slave, and we're not hearing the master. The sync knob is controlling the tuning of the slave relative to some unheard master that's underneath this, which is actually taking the input from the keyboard and allowing this oscillator to track the keyboard. So when I depress a key and then sweep the knob, you can hear that really nice sync effect that we want, but we're not hearing the master oscillator at all. We're actually just hearing the slave oscillator and the sync knob controlling its tuning. Its cycle is still being reset by that master, and so we're still getting the effect that we want. It's still tracking the keyboard, and it's still going to stay in tune. But the extra harmonic content is being generated by this single sync knob. So your sync settings are either going to be controlled through a knob like this, and it may say sync, or it may say sync amount, or it may say sync ratio, or something of the like. Or your sync settings may be controlled via directly controlling the pitch of one of those two oscillators if you have a toggle switch. So to start with, I'm just going to deactivate these two oscillators here just so that we've got this single oscillator going. And I've got my sync setting all the way down, so we're just hearing the direct output of this oscillator without its cycle being reset at all according to the master. And there's a couple other little quick things that I'm going to do just to set this patch up. I'm going to adjust the voicing a little bit. This type of sound is really rooted in 70s funk and prog rock, and a lot of the time if this type of sound is created in modern dance music, it's designed to kind of emulate that sound. So at that point in time, most of the synths that would have been gigged by prog rock bands or funk bands would have been either the Mini Moog or something similar to the Mini Moog. So it would have been a monophonic synth. So we're going to switch it over to monophonic in the voicing section. I also do want to set my synth to legato triller, just so that when I depress a key and then another key, it flips back to the first. So like so. And I then want to quickly adjust my amp envelope here. So in this case, it's envelope 4. And I'm just going to get rid of the attack, and I'm going to bring the sustain all the way up so that we have, again, a simple toggle envelope, an on-off envelope. And I am going to play around with the release setting a little bit later on, but for right now, that is going to be good. Those are the basics of setting up this patch. The next step is going to be applying an envelope to the sync amount. So let's start off with envelope 3 here, and I'm just going to bring it over and drop it into the sync mod slot there. And I'm just going to bring a little bit up, and we're going to start looking for some sweet spots. So you can hear right there that our envelope is causing our slave oscillator to jump up in pitch and then back down so that we get a nice sync sweep. But it's not doing what we want. It's just going down. We want to get a nice kind of wow effect. So that means that we're going to need to start playing with the attack a little bit. So. Okay, that's sounding good. And I think I want to bring the decay out a little bit and the sustain down a little bit so that we get a bit more of a pronounced wow. A little bit more attack. And let's try a little bit more of that envelope. Okay, that's sounding good as a very basic starting point here. Now I'm just going to adjust the actual wavetable position here. I'm going to flip it over to pulse wave. And that's giving me a little bit more of what I want. I want that kind of nice nasal, hollow sound. So let's just try playing that a couple octaves up and down. So that's already a pretty nice sound. It's got a lot of character, and it's definitely going to jump out of the speakers a fair amount. I want to play around now with a little bit of a sweet spot in the interaction between envelopes 3 and 4. As I mentioned, I do want to play around with the release setting of my amp envelope, so I'm just going to bring that up a little bit. A little bit more. Okay, now I want to play with the release on envelope 3 so that as I release the key, we still get a little bit of that sync sweep following the tail of the amp envelope's release. So as I bring this out, we'll start hearing the sync envelope take its effect over the course of its cycle, so it'll jump up and then back down. And then when I release the key, it's still going to continue a little bit of downward motion, so we still get a little bit of harmonic movement as the envelope finishes its cycle here. So. So the next step is going to be to add a little bit of glide. It's not going to be a lot. It's just going to allow for some extra funk in the patch here. So let's bring it up a little bit more. A little bit more. Okay, that's sounding quite good. So now we're going to look for a little bit of fatness to come from a second oscillator here. And I'm going to go again for a synced oscillator. So it's the same waveform as before. It's our virtual analog saw pulse sync. And I'm going to bring it up not quite as much in the mix. I'm going to start off by dropping it down an octave just to see if I can get the kind of result that I want from a little bit of a lower tone. And let's just hear how that sounds. Okay. So that's balancing out quite nicely already. Just adding a little bit in the lower range there. And I'm going to take envelope 3 and I'm going to apply it to the sync amount again, but I'm not going to go as high this time. So we're going to get a similar type of motion as what we have in oscillator 1, but not to the same extent. And because it's dropped down an octave and the envelope is controlling the sync amount a little bit less, we're just going to get a little bit of a different motion with that oscillator compared to what we have with oscillator 1. And that type of routing where you take one mod source and route it to two different oscillators to different amounts gives a similar kind of effect as to what you get from detuning or phasing, in that you have similar motions, but they're slightly off from each other, and so it'll create interesting effects as the oscillators go through their mod cycles. So let's listen to that. Let's try bringing that up more. You can hear a huge amount there. And we're just going to leave it down lower there. So now I'm going to be looking for a little bit of grit. And in order to do that, I'm going to utilize our filters and the different routing options that we have here in Massive. So I'm going to use insert 1, and I'm going to use the parabolic shaper, which I've just got dialed up here. In order to get the grit that I want, I'm going to take oscillator 2 and route it through filter 2, which is now in parallel. And insert 1 is going to be affecting the flow as the audio passes through this filter 2 routing. So you can hear a good amount of distortion there. It might actually be a little bit too much. So I'm just going to route that back over to filter 1 a little bit. And I'm going to bring a little bit of oscillator 1 over so it's getting passed through that first insert there as well. Okay, I'm liking how that's sounding for now. So I'm just going to pop back into Ableton from Massive here, and I'm going to turn this into an instrument rack, and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm just going to relabel my instances of Massive here. So I'm going to have top mid, and I'm going to have fattened. And I'm choosing those names because we're not really going to have a top and mid separately. This is a very big synth sound, and it's going to take up all of the spectrum that I really need. But I do want to have this secondary instance of Massive here, which I'm calling fattened, as a backup, which I'm just going to process to a heavier extent than I do the top and mid line. So the top and mid, I'm going to introduce a couple audio effects to. I'm going to put in an instance of utility, and I'm just going to bring down the stereo width in it a little bit. Fattened, I'm going to put in a utility and bring it up a little bit, just so that whatever I choose to add is going to take up a little bit more of the spectrum. And we're not going to necessarily bother adding a sub right now, because this is a lead line, not a bass line, and we're getting a good amount of lower end thickness as is. So to start with, I'm going to take fattened, and I'm going to apply an EQ8 to it. I'm going to shave out a little bit of the lower range, and I'm going to pick a couple frequencies in the mid-high range to boost a little bit, just to get it to accent a little bit more in the upper frequencies. So we'll start around here. I'm just going to solo this, and we'll see what we're working with. Okay, cool. I'm going to immediately add a saturator with the a bit warmer preset right before EQ8 there. I'm going to bring that down in the mix a little bit. Let's listen to the two together. And we're going to add some spatial effects, just a simple delay. And we're going to go for a phaser as well. And I'm going to put the phaser before the delay in the chain. That way the delay is working on the output of the phaser. So I'm going to start off just by, actually turn off the delay, and we'll start off by playing with the phaser here and finding a frequency and feedback amount that we like. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of the dry signal back in. And because this is a funk kind of styled synth, there's going to be a little bit of benefit to adding some envelope control over this. So the envelope is just going to be jumping the frequency of the phaser up according to the volume input. So we're just going to tap that key a couple times and play with the envelope settings a little bit just to get some kind of harmonic sweeping. So we're getting a little bit of motion from the envelope there, which is quite nice. And I'm going to turn that delay on now, and I'm going to put it into time mode because we're going to want some really short delays. I'm going to bring the feedback up a bit, and let's hear how that sounds. That's sounding quite good. I almost feel like it could use a little bit more distortion, but I'm going to hold off on that right now because we're actually going to add a little bit of distortion to the entire mix. So I'm just going to bring the top mid synth back in. So we've got a nice big fat tone there already. I'm just going to quickly rename my rack as sync leader. And we're going to work on adding a couple really simple things to the output of the entire rack just to degrade the signal a little bit and give us a little bit more of a kind of rock and roll feel. So we're going to add an instance of erosion, which works quite well for degrading signals. And I'm just going to look for a sweet spot with it as well. That's sounding good, actually. And I'm going to take that and put it into an audio effect rack. And I'm going to create a chain here so that we have a wet-dry on the erosion effect. Listen to it dry. And that sounds about right for now. So that's just going to introduce a little bit of grit and hiss into the sound. And I'm going to also add an instance of amp. And we're going to start off with one of the presets here. We'll start with bass roundup, and we may tweak it out a little bit from there. Start all the way wet and hear what we have. So we're getting some nice space from that. There's some interesting top end stuff that's happening. You can hear that the sound feels a little bit more distant, and there's a little bit of harmonic distortion that's happening in the upper registers. But obviously we're destroying the body of the sound with that, and so again we're going to balance this out with our wet dry knob. Okay, maybe a little bit less. And I'm going to pop back in. I feel like we could maybe even go a little bit harder with our sync setting on that first oscillator that we were working with here. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of the envelope to that. Let's hear if I bring it up a lot. Yeah, too much. So. We'll bring a little bit of white noise in as well. And just because we have an absolute ton of stuff going on now, I'm going to just make sure that we've got it all under control. I'm going to bring in an instance of Ableton's compressor, bring down the threshold a little bit. I'm going to put it in RMS mode, so it's a nice averaging mode. And let's see what's happening with our gain reduction. Let me just throw a utility on the end. Bring it down a little bit. So that's a good starting point. And I'm going to add a beat and program a simple pattern now. And once I've got that done, I'm going to come back through and maybe adjust a few of the envelope settings and a little bit of the sync amount so that we're getting the effect that we want within the context of a track that we're working on. So I've created a simple phrase and a beat to go along with it, and I'll let you hear the phrase quickly. And I'll let you hear the beat as well, just so that you can hear all the elements before I add them together. So, very simple beat. So let's quickly listen to everything together here. So now that I've listened to this in context, what I'm going to do is actually dial back a little bit of the erosion, because I feel like we're losing a good amount of the warmth of that signal from that erosion just overriding the dry signal there. Let's just listen to this again. So we'll leave it closer to -9 there, and the amp I may pull back on as well. To introduce a little bit more of the treble from the amp. Okay, that sounded good. So I'm going to pop back into our instance of massive here that's providing the body of our tone, and I'm going to just adjust a few of the settings, a few of the release settings and the glide settings so that it works better with the pattern that I've created. Sometimes when you design a patch like this, you add various elements like glide and long release times and things like that, and they work when you're designing the patch and just playing it ad hoc on the keyboard. But when you've created a synth line and you're actually listening to it in the context of the tune, the tempo of the tune and the density of the tune might not work with what you've already programmed. So you need to go back and just kind of tweak those things out a little bit. So let's actually just have a quick listen. So I want a little bit more of that portamento, so I'm just going to bring the glide time upwards a little bit. And I feel like I've added a little bit too much grit to the sound. It's kind of overpowering the oscillator sync effect. So I'm going to pull back on the white noise a little bit here. And I'm going to pull back on the wet dry on that parabolic shaper a little bit. And now I'm just going to listen to the fattened tone. And I'll listen to my top mid. I feel like the fattened tone can come up in the mix a little bit. Okay, that's sounding better. And let's listen to them all together. Okay, that's sounding pretty good. So to get this to fit into the mix a little bit more, there's some other spatial effects that I would dial up within the context of a working track. For example, a little bit of dub delay and a little bit of extra reverb. But as it is, that sounds great for a nice sync lead patch. And as you can hear, it sounds good up and down the keyboard again. So there's a lot of nice elements in that patch, which means it's a really good starting point for a lot of other sounds as well. And that's how you create a nice envelope swept sync lead definitely a sound that you'll end up using in your tunes.